Now, one of the first things that a hacker will try when he's going to try to compromise a password or guess a password is let's go for the administrator account. After all, most users simply put in the CD, install the software, and voila, they go about their way. A lot of times people don't even bother to change the name of the administrator account. So if I can find the administrator account and I can guess the password to that account, which typically will be very easy to do, then I have the keys to the kingdom, so to speak. Now, assuming that I have NetBIOS running, I can simply go and launch a NetBIOS type attack. I can do any of the kind of attacks to actually go over TCP port 139 and try to crack that administrative password. And sometimes this is most effective, especially with NT or 2000 environments. I can simply create a null session, enumerate the accounts. Once I know the account, then I can simply try username and password combinations. And I can try any of the shares that are on a system to actually create my null session. Now, one of the reasons why this can be so effective is because typically what's going to happen is people are not going to use complex passwords for the administrator account. Or if I have multiple people that are using the administrator account for administrative purposes, I may choose a password that's easy for all of those people to remember. So typically what I will do whenever I'm trying to manually crack a particular account, in this case the administrator account, is I'll go ahead and take that account and create a list of my possible passwords. And of course, to make my efforts a little bit faster, I'll rank those passwords in order of their probability. In other words, I'll start out with the most common password and then go down to maybe some of the more obscure passwords. I then will simply go right down the list and key in each of the different passwords. And basically, if the system lets me in, voila, now I have the password. If it doesn't, then I move on to the next word. Now, if I don't want to do this manually, in fact, a lot of times that's not practical, I may do some kind of an automatic password cracking. Now, there are many different programs out there that I can use, but the idea that they use or the premise they operate under is the same. You take the account, you find out what kind of algorithm was used to create the password or to hash the password, and then I obtain that list of encrypted passwords, in other words, the hash. I create then a list of possible passwords and then just go down the list again, only this time I'm taking each of those passwords and I encrypt them using whatever encryption the system is. And then what I do is once I find the correct password, I get access to the system. If I don't, I move down the line and try the next possible password. I can also do automated password guessing, and this can be as complex or as simple as I need it to be. In other words, did you know that I can write a simple bat file and use it on most Windows systems to create a simple loop to try all of the different passwords? Now, these passwords files that are located anywhere on the internet are easy for me to get a hold of, and they have a lot of information or a lot of possible passwords. I don't even necessarily have to find a dictionary file. I can simply create a smaller file just of the passwords I think are most likely. So in this case, I create a small file. Let's say we'll call it credentials.txt, put all of the different username and passwords in there, and then with a simple for loop in a bat file, I can simply run and try each possible combination until I find the one that works and actually lets me into the system. I mentioned NetBIOS earlier, and one of the tools that I can use to try to crack a password using NetBIOS is called NAT, the NetBIOS auditing tool. Now, this tool is originally designed for me to audit the NetBIOS on my system and help find the different weaknesses. What it basically does is just steps through each of the different user accounts and tries the different passwords. It also tries to establish null sessions. So if I can get a null session, then I know that the system is possible for me to connect to. Once I have that null session, then I could launch any kind of transactions against that server, including trying to access the different file shares. Sometimes I really don't even have to compromise an account. By simply compromising the file system, I can go ahead and access the information that I want. Another tool that can be very effective is the SMB-BF. In other words, the SMB brute force tool. Now, with this tool, what I can do is through using SMB, I can try to brute force different accounts. Now, one of the nice things about this tool is it lets me try it in different stages. In other words, I could use the G switch to go and not try every account until it locks out. In other words, detect what is the number of attempts that the system will allow before it locks the account out and only try just beneath that particular number. One of the more common tools that you've probably heard of is called Loft Crack. Now this crack basically is a password auditing tool and a password recovery package, and it lets me recover the password. Say if somebody was dismissed and they didn't give a password out, I can go back and use this software to help examine that file. This has the ability to download their different hashes and to actually take and then crack them. It's a very, very common tool. It's all over the internet, and it's something that a lot of people have used to crack these different passwords. Now it does require that password file itself, but again, that's not necessarily a hard file to get a hold of. Now we spoke earlier about our different kinds of authentication. Let's take a little bit of, or a little closer look at some of the different forms. With Microsoft Authentication, basically you have what's called NTLM, or the NT LAN Manager. This is basically a challenge response type of authentication, and it was the default protocol when I had Windows NT 4 and Windows 2000. So basically the client issued I want to log in, the server would issue a challenge back, and then once I responded with the correct response to that challenge, I would be authenticated. Now Microsoft introduced with Windows 2000, and they use it even more heavily with 2003, Kerberos authentication. Now Kerberos is much more secure than NTLM. However, Kerberos can still be cracked. So while Kerberos provides more protection for my network, it can still be compromised. So to look at the NTLM, originally you had the LM, or just simply the LAN Manager authentication, and then Microsoft introduced their NTLM version 1. Now it had some weaknesses, and considering the strength of computers at the time, it was susceptible, so of course they came out with NTLM version 2. With each one of these different technologies, you have different matters that you have to consider. For instance, with LAN Manager, passwords are not case sensitive, which automatically reduces the complexity of the password and makes it that much easier for me to crack or hack. Now with NTLM, yes, I introduced password case sensitivity, so it made it a little bit tougher. But each of them, again, had their different weaknesses. So basically, once I identify what technique has been used to hash or encrypt that password, then I know what my parameters are, and I can figure out how much effort it's going to take to crack that password.